Hello and welcome to the O&M Stockroom. We're your hosts, Brian McGarry.
And Ken O'Malley.
Tonight is episode 22 of Complimentary Cinema. If you are new to the channel, Complimentary Cinema is a program where we review and discuss films you can watch for free that are available on YouTube. Please be warned, we discuss these films in detail, so consider this a full spoiler alert. So this was your week to pick the film, and what film did we pick, Ken?
The movie we watched this week is called Blackthorn, and it is a Western film of international variety. So it takes place in Bolivia, and it is a mixture of English and Spanish and some indigenous language. And it's a kind of a different take on a Western.
Starring Sam Shepard, who was in The Right Stuff and just a bunch of other movies over the years, but he's probably best known for The Right Stuff. And we also have Eduardo Noriega as Eduardo Epatica. I'm going to butcher that, sorry. Stephen Ray as McKinley. Magali Solier as Yana. Nikolai Costner-Waldo as James. And Padraig Delaney as Sundance. And Dominique McElligott as Edda. And then you got a few other stragglers. So, this was we've done a couple Westerns. We did Missouri Breaks a while back, and that was a pretty fun one. And on the whole, I really enjoy Western films. I just never think to put one on just for the fun of it. But this was a good one because it has that South American twist to it. So many of the Western films, they take place solely in the American, Southwest or like on the plains. Rarely do you get out of that scene. Even the spaghetti Westerns of the 60s and early 70s, even though they were filmed in Italy, they still were set in the American Southwest. And this one doesn't pretend to be either, which I like.
Yeah, it's definitely a different take than one we've seen before. I kind of feel similarly as far as I never think of watching a Western, but we've had a string of good luck, I would say, with the last couple. The first one we watched was not so great, the White Buffalo.
Yeah, well, I mean, Charles Bronson was in that one, and that kind of should have been all that we needed to know about that particular film.
Yeah. So this is the story of Butch Cassidy, who at this point is rather elderly. It's been basically at some point there were some people that died, and they speculated that it was him, but it turns out that was not true. And Butch Cassidy is still alive. He's been raising horses on a small ranch, and just kind of living a life being a free man in Bolivia. So he lives in this beautiful mountain range. He lives kind of in, what is that called? The saddle between two different mountains. And it's just beautiful. He lives in a kind of a little bit of a tropical, what's it called? Like not rainforest, but it's kind of like that misty.
It's a very lush, forested area.
Yeah. And he just seems like he has a great little life. He lives next to a creek that has kind of waterfalls in it. And he has a beautiful woman that apparently comes and lives life with him. Apparently they're not married, but, they have a good time together.
She works for him, but they both get a little more out of the arrangement, if you follow my drift.
Yeah. And, it seems like he's lived this life, this whole different life. It said he's been there for 20 years. Just, in this little corner of the world, living like a normal person, just living off the land and that kind of stuff.
And breeding horses apparently to some measure of success. So before we jump too much further into the summary, 3 things that we like to look for in all these films that we review here. We've got 3 primary criteria. Is it well written? Is it well acted? And is it well produced? We shall find out at the end.
So the story, like I said, is mostly about Butch Cassidy, And it turns out that he's been writing to his nephew, who is living in America, and he's been writing him letters, and he decides that he's at the point of his life where he's older, and he feels like if he's going to die, he might as well go home and do it and get to meet his nephew, who he's never met. And so the story is kind of, he's selling his horses and just using the money to go back to America, where obviously he is still an outlaw, but he figures he can just, nobody will be looking for him there anymore.
And the general consensus with law enforcement is that he's dead anyway.
Right. So he just decides to go back home, and this is kind of the story of what happens, right after that.
So one of his first pit stops, is naturally, hey, I'm going to go to the bank and, collect my funds and everything. And, he does that, and he ends up having a business meeting where he sells his horses. And during that meeting, with other, well-heeled white men, they kind of make a jab at the local Indian population that, how come they can't, breed any decent horses? Seems like it should be easy enough. And, Blackthorn, as he goes by, takes exception to this. We can tell, but they can't. He's like, hey, the terrain isn't good for those kinds of horses and everything, and it's not naturally suited to the environment. Say, would you guys like to play some cards? And he gets his little revenge on their racism by basically just clearing them out and getting this really nice silver watch off of them. That was a great moment.
And throughout all this part, kind of in the beginning, we're seeing his kind of sense of humor and the way he looks at life. And this character is great. He's got this kind of wisdom and practical outlook on everything. Like you said, he's able to turn on people kind of without them knowing. He remains very congenial about it, and you can tell they don't kind of pick up on the his subtle little, he's like, oh, I haven't played cards in a long time. Back on the ranch all we had was Indians, or
we don't have we didn't have any fine civilized folk or
right.
civilized men like you folk or something.
Exactly. So he's always he's got that kind of edge to him where it's not obvious.
It's very well disguised, but he's as sharp as ever, for this gray old man who's just been living in the woods for 20 years. So, so we get, so he sells his horses, he gets his money out of the bank. He's got thousands of dollars on him, which, when you look at the inflation calculator, you find out he has about like $6,000, which was about over $90,000 when adjusted for inflation for today. So he's rolling around with a not inconsiderable sum that he wants to use to take back to the States. And on his way out, he's riding his horse and kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and then he runs into a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, he finds a horse that's laying on the ground dead, and so he's kind of cautious, obviously, about this. And when he rolls up to it, he finds that someone starts shooting at him while he's there. And this unknown person accidentally, however it goes, shoots the horse. And so his horse starts running away, which of course has all the money in it and all of his possessions and anything that he has.
Literally everything that Blackthorn needs to get back to the States.
Yes.
And go see his nephew.
And he's kind of out in the wilderness. It's not like he's on a road. He's just been traveling across country. So he sneaks up on the assailant and finds that it is a guy in really bad shape who thinks that Blackthorn is after him. Apparently he has done something bad and there's people after him. So, Blackthorn says, hey, you basically what you just said, as far as everything I have is running off into the desert now. You owe me. And why shouldn't I kill you, kind of thing.
And this this jerk who basically made him lose his horse and his money, that's the character of Eduardo. played by an actor named Eduardo, as it works out. And Eduardo says, hey, I was an engineer. I worked for this big evil mine owner named Patino, and I stole a bunch of money, and I'll give you some. I'll give you back your money. Just don't kill me, and don't let these other people catch up to me.
It's worth noting earlier, it wasn't Patino one of the people he played poker with? Or they just mentioned him? Because I know the name came up earlier, but couldn't remember if
I must have completely missed that.
Either he was one of the people at the table or they just mentioned it at that point. So it ties it in.
He might have been one of the people at the table.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and watch, but no time for that now.
So anyway, Blackthorn still is kind of not interested. So he just, he says whatever statement he makes and goes off on his way and starts heading into this kind of barren plateau. And he finds some railroad tracks to follow, and he's kind of headed back into a town. But Eduardo catches up to him, and Eduardo is just kind of pathetic and you can get the sense he doesn't know how to survive. Blackthorn is like, he could get by in the bush. Even though he's lost all of his stuff, he's going to be fine. He's going to make it. But this Eduardo character is definitely soft and just not up to the challenge of survival.
At one point in the film, Eduardo gets bad saddle rash, which Blackthorn has to address. And he summed up the character perfectly as far as ruggedness goes. There is something like your behind's as soft as a bookkeeper's.
Yeah.
That's essentially that character in a nutshell. He's kind of almost groveling and sniveling, especially at first, because he's just so out of his depth.
Yeah.
And Blackthorn's just like this, this old grizzly badass.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he's basically lived like 3 or 4 lives at this point.
So Eduardo, he basically keeps tagging along, and eventually he convinces Blackthorn, I've got some money. I'll give you some money. Blackthorn's like, I want half. And makes a very good case for why he wants half. It's like, just a lot of great dialogue in this film. Like, in the scene, he talks about how, every foot I walk without a horse, every hour in the sun, every time every hour I go without water, like you owe me for that, so I want half. And, Eduardo he has absolutely there's nothing he can say to that.
Yeah. Well, and it turns out too that there are people after him. There's people following Eduardo, and there's like a bunch of them. I think there's like 9 or 10.
Oh, there's more than that. There's like probably 13 or 14.
It's
a squad of people on horseback, and they're all very fierce South American Indians.
And we find out he had, maybe a day or two lead. So since now they're on foot and the people following are on horseback, that's been cut down quite a bit. So they're going to have to do some maneuvering to stay ahead of them.
They end up getting a couple of mules at one place. They end up making their way to the abandoned mine where he stashed his money. And that's the first place where the pursuers first catch up with them.
I was gonna say right before that too, we see a big change or difference between the two of them when they go into the bar. Eduardo, like, he just wants water, and he's not really talking to the people at all, and they just give him a little pittance. And then when Blackthorn comes in, he immediately makes a connection with the native bar owner and the other people there, and you can see how he treats the people differently, and they treat him differently. And that kind of plays in the whole theme of the movie as well.
That's a great point, because like when he walks into that bar, he drops a couple of coins. And I think even beside the fact that, hey, he's got money, they're just like, oh, it's this hombre.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good one to bring up.
So then they get to the mine, which would be the next place after that. And that's where Eduardo stashed whatever he stole. So it turns out he's stolen, I guess,
the equivalent of like $50,000.
Right. Yes.
Which, when adjusted for inflation, is like $700,000 now.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of money.
Yes. So apparently, since he was an engineer, he's stashed at a place where he would know. He knows the mine, backwards and forwards. So they have no problem getting it. But then they're kind of caught because the pursuers have entered the mine. So they strategically shoot out their lights so they can escape and find it. He knows another way out, which takes them kind of the top of the mountain.
And far away from their mules, which...
Yeah, once again, they're back on foot.
They're back on foot. There's a lot of time in this movie spent on foot, and this is one of those scenes.
And they've left all their other stuff behind again.
Yeah, at some point... So here's the fun part. So, like, often, like, in a film where there's some pursuit of money like this, that's the film. Like, that's the end goal of the film, is like, how do we get this money, and make off scot-free? And there's great buildup to getting the money. There's a lot of, tension and suspense leading up to that. But by the time they get to it, it's just like, oh, hey, here's the money. And then they go on their way, and you still have 3/4 of the movie left, which I really, really liked.
Yeah. Well, especially at that point, too, because they've got a pretty good lead once they come out of the mine on a different side, because the people won't know where the hell they went. And so Blackthorn says, well, we don't really have a lot of options. Let's just go back to my ranch. He wasn't planning on going back there, but, we might as well just go back to the ranch and wait it out for a little while.
He did plan to go back to the ranch once and then be gone for good.
That's true.
If you remember at the beginning. So it was always his plan to stop by there for just a little bit and then go for good.
That's fair. So they head back to the ranch. So they go, we haven't mentioned it yet, but this movie is just beautiful. Every scene is just incredible scenery. So, traveling from this plateau, kind of not desert, but, kind of scrub lands, back into the hills and back through the mountains and on these little winding roads back to the kind of misty mountain areas. It's just incredible. And it kind of tells part of the story too, as far as they keep changing places.
This movie makes me realize how little I actually know about Bolivia and South America generally. And I'm going to have a lot of Googling to do in the next few days and lots of stuff to read because, like if this was actually, now this is a foreign film, but done in English. So I believe it was filmed in, South America. I would love to know where they filmed because my God, we watched that Norwegian film a few weeks back. What was that one called?
Troll Hunter.
Troll Hunter. Okay. So that movie, filmed and set in Norway, absolutely gorgeous vistas constantly. And this one, I think of all the films that we've watched, it's probably the most beautiful visually.
Yeah.
In terms of just the scenery and where they filmed. And I also love that there's not one frame of CGI in this film.
Yeah. It stays super grounded. Like you said, no over the top effects or anything that would be noticeable. And the scenery is just nonstop beautiful. All these little villages and just the natural rocks and formations and everything. And like none of it's wasted either. Like it's all, it all kind of has a purpose. So they travel back to his farm and they run into Yana.
Yana, that is the woman, the very beautiful young Indian woman who comes to work for him and occasionally do a little extra.
Yeah. So they kind of have a, because they got pretty banged up during their encounters before. So they kind of took some time to heal up and, resupply and everything like that. And don't really suspect that anyone's onto them anymore as far as, would suspect they would go there.
They think they've gotten away scot-free.
So they have a nice night. Yana stays over and, they have a nice time. And then in the morning, they find there's like two native women kind of at the gate. And Blackthorn goes out to see what they want. And they say, well, we found your horse because, earlier his horse ran away with all the money and all the possessions.
And that would be a great way to track him back to his ranch.
Right.
Which they have.
And so they said, well, we'll give you your horse back if you give us the Spaniard, which is our other character. A lot of people call him the Spaniard because that's what he is as far as these people are concerned.
An outsider.
Right.
Not a gringo.
It's from Spain.
But, Spaniard. And unfortunately, that encounter doesn't go well, and there is a shootout, which takes Yana away from a stoic but grieving Blackthorn.
Who also gets a nice shot in his shoulder.
A pretty nasty one, too, that takes him quite a while to heal from. And so they come out on top on that one, but, much worse for wear. And Eduardo helps nurse him back to health and helps cauterize his wound and everything. And it's funny because up until that point, I'm like, this guy is nuts for wanting to leave, like, his beautiful, young Indian woman, this beautiful house, humble but beautiful, and living in absolute paradise. Like, why would you want to for me, like, that was the last thing keeping him there. So once she was gone, it made it easy for him to, continue his journey and really actually leave.
Well, they even mention it too. Like, Eduardo says, like, well, why do you want to leave this place? Because he can recognize too that it's a pretty great setup. And Blackthorn just says it's just a place. To him, it's just, and you get that sense too that, like, he does have a connection to the people, and this person he likes, and the native people. You get the idea that he likes them, but the place doesn't really matter to him, and he's just kind of got that. He's got that mentality of, like, end of life, like, the old bear just going on his way for one last trip, one last time around.
It's definitely the people that make a place. And I guess, like, when your favorite person in that place is gone,
yeah,
then you definitely have nothing to stick around for.
I mean, at that point, he had no choice because, the other people, they've sent 2 people to look for you. They're going to come with the rest of them.
They'll send 30 more if they have to. Yeah,
exactly. So at that point, they have no choice but to try to escape.
And yeah, so after he heals up for a couple of days, they take off, and they where do they end up after that?
They head towards the desert. That was the next area.
Oh yeah, so they go to the desert.
They go to the town. There's some flashbacks in here too. We start getting flashbacks of when Blackthorn is younger, when he's with what's
the
her?
Sundance Kid and Etta.
Yeah, Sundance Kid and Etta, and kind of how they came to be in this place. So, there's a couple scenes of them in their bandit days. There's some scenes of them when they first come to Bolivia and they think that, everything's safe, but it turns out that there is still, at least one Pinkerton still looking for them. And it kind of develops their backstory in some of these flashbacks through this section. And that's kind of interspersed with some travel and, like, just when it's relevant for it to come up. And the thing I like about the flashbacks in this movie is they're not overdone. Like, they're just kind of short, and they're just, they give you what you need, and we don't dwell on it for too long.
They provide momentary relevant context, which is perfect. So many flashback scenes in films exist simply to inform stupid audiences. It's like a lot of them are actually pretty insulting for the most part. It's always like it's like the writers think you're too dumb to figure something out for yourself, so let's have a flashback that'll explain it for you. And you don't. That's not what these kinds of flashbacks are. They just deepen. The characters and deepen the story. And they are short and sweet. They don't go on and on and on. And there's not like 50 of them. There's like maybe 4.
Yeah.
And they're paced. They're spaced really far enough in between that you kind of forget about them until they pop up again.
Yeah.
which
Very
I
true.
also liked.
Very true. Um, and you just kind of get a sense of the connections, and you get a little bit more, an idea why he wants to go see his nephew too, like why that would be something he would want to go do. You kind of get that in this as well, because really, he's kind of more than an uncle in a way. It seems like it's a bit of a love triangle between the three of them.
It's almost as if, even though Etta was with the Sundance Kid, it's almost as if the child may actually be Butch Cassidy's, aka Blackthorn's.
Right. So it's but basically to them it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
That was kind of the takeaway. They were going to live their life this certain way, and nothing was really going to get in the way of that.
And Etta ended up, taking her pregnant belly back to the States. And, the kid and Butch, she just basically stayed behind and, tried to, I wouldn't say they tried to live honestly, but they didn't seem like they were trying to be bandits either down there.
It seemed like they weren't trying to kill people. I think that's kind of the sense you get too from Blackthorn, is that's part of what's changed. He, not like you said, not even that they're trying to be honest, but they just want to live their life and lay low until they're forgotten. They want to get to a point where they can go back to living more of a normal life. And they even say, because they think she's going to come back eventually, which obviously that never happens. Once she goes back to America, then that's she never comes back. But also that Sundance doesn't make it. They think he's dead, but in actuality he does die, just not the way they thought.
That was a pretty sad scene there too.
Yeah.
So you end up with this Blackthorn just ending up there, basically alone in South America, and he just stays.
Yep. He just, he wants to be his own man, and that's, to him, that's the most important thing. So, through this part, they're traveling on, and they get to the part where they're on the edge of the salt flat, which is like, they have to get all the way across it.
It's a huge expanse, and it was kind of a strategy decision, It was a strategic decision, tactical decision on their part, because if they had gone other ways, they would have been ambushed and killed or whatever.
Right.
But going this way, it really becomes a question of like whose horses will die first, because it's a huge expanse that they have to cross. And there's no shelter, there's no water,
and anyone can see anyone coming, so there won't be any surprises. It'll just be, who can survive the longest to get across the other side.
And they do at some point they end up splitting up.
Yeah, they get to a kind of in the middle. There's kind of this rocky, just outcropping in the middle, and that's they take a little bit of time to rest there, but it's not going to be enough. They have to keep going, so they just split up, and
they each have an encounter with their pursuers, and they both narrowly, Eduardo and Blackthorn both narrowly win.
And by this point too, it should be kind of mentioned that they've built a relationship over this time. I think part of it a little bit is he's thinking back to when he had good friends and people he really counted on. And he, not that he needs another person, but it's just like Eduardo becomes that person that they trust each other because they've saved each other's lives. And, he's going to let Eduardo go with the money. That's a big sign of trust. He's going to let him take it. He's going to go a separate way, and they're going to meet up later.
A huge sign of trust. And so they do, so they split up. They get, they don't get ambushed, but they have their confrontations. They both narrowly win. Blackthorn ends up making it to the edge of the salt field or lake, it's a huge area. It looks like it took days to cross. Again, I need to Google that because I would love to see if that's really there in Bolivia. And he ends up, basically he's just a complete wreck. He's dehydrated, he's exhausted, he's practically on death's door, and he ends up at a doctor's office. And the doctor recognizes him for who he actually is, as Butch Cassidy, the famed American bandit. and he calls the old Pinkerton agent that had almost snagged him, decades before when he was still with Etta and the kid.
And it turns out that this Pinkerton guy has ever since been just kind of consumed by it. And, he's an alcoholic. He doesn't stop drinking, the rest of the time we see him. And, apparently he's just been dreaming this whole time of what he would do. He never believed that they were dead. And, he's just been thinking about what he'll do and how they'll apologize to him because he was right. And so it's just, he's finally had his day.
And then in the morning, after keeping a vigil all night, McKinley, the name of this Pinkerton agent, he's just, been sitting there drinking this whole time, just staring at Butch Cassidy at Blackthorn. And when Blackthorn awakens in the morning, our former Pinkerton agent, McKinley, starts talking to him and, talks about his grand visions of what would happen and how he's come to the realization that they're too old to be playing this game, and he just wants to rest and just continue the quiet, simple life that he has had the last however many years, just working for the consul for a pittance every month and just greeting the occasional random North American that happens to stray through.
Yeah, so he's, it's just like one of those, it was a great scene. It just, he recognizes, like, we're two old men, like, everything that happened before, it's, it doesn't amount to anything anymore. We both are living the lives we want to live, so what's the point? But he'd already called for the army the night before, so they are on the way. So, now we've got this other element of there's people coming that think Butch Cassidy is there, in addition to the theft of the money. So this has kind of raised them on the radar a bit. So McKinley decides he's actually going to help him. So he sets him up with a little place outside of town, with someone who will host him without saying anything or selling him out. And that's going to be it. He'll go on his way after that. So we also find out that Eduardo has also made it across and met up in the town. But when he sees that the army's there, he decides he's going to leave on his own and not wait, not regroup.
And you also see some of those very stern-faced Indian pursuers who have been chasing Blackthorn and Eduardo this entire time. So clearly, they're communicating to some extent with the military, and with now McKinley. So the plot does thicken here. And shortly after, McKinley sets Blackthorn up at his little hideout. McKinley finds out the truth of Eduardo and what he's done. And he goes and he finds Blackthorn and talks to him and lets him know, like, Eduardo didn't steal from Patino. Patino sold, or ended up selling, I guess, forcibly selling that mine to the miners, to the Indians themselves. And he's just flabbergasted that Blackthorn didn't know this, because it was huge news a couple of years ago. Everybody knew it, but Blackthorn's been living in the woods, living this very peaceful, quiet life and keeping to himself. So, this is 1927 is when this film is set.
And the people he's near, the native people, they also are just living off the land. So he doesn't get news from them either. So even the people he interacts with don't care.
Yeah. So, like, even if he had kept even a casual foot into the civilized world, he never would have fallen for Eduardo's lie, supposedly, if that's true about Eduardo. And, with that knowledge, Blackthorn decides, okay, so I'm going to go. Well, he goes and he finds Eduardo and confronts him. Eduardo's thrilled to see his bandit friend again. And he's like, wow, I knew it. You were the Butch Cassidy. And, he's genuinely excited to see him and happy to see him. And, Blackthorn's just sitting there on the ground, just looking at him. Are you okay? Are you okay? He says.
and he just has one line, you know, did you steal, from the Indians, from the native people?
Yeah, he confronts Eduardo pretty much outright, and Eduardo does admit that yeah he stole, but your name isn't Blackthorn either. We all have our secrets, and Eduardo does not have any of the kind of sense of honor or loyalty that Blackthorn does. And that's the huge difference between these two men.
And Blackthorn doesn't have anyone else. Like, the native people are the closest thing he has to people in this land, and he has no connection to the people back home either, except for this nephew of his. So, he just, it's just like, you don't do it, They mention it kind of, I think, in another part, where it's like, that's just not the way we operated, We like to live free. It wasn't about necessarily just being bandits. It wasn't about being violent. It was about living free when we first started out. And it just kind of changed over time.
As over time, as the West was civilized with railroads and ranchers, there became less room for everyone. And which is, a great reason to go to South America, especially back then. There was still much more of that frontier aspect to it. And so essentially Eduardo represents the antithesis of all of that to him. And he ends up shooting him in the leg and making his horse run off, and basically leaves him there with his money to be captured or killed. And that is essentially the film. There's a little more after that, but we'll save that for the viewer if they want.
Yeah, there's a lot of connective tissue even in this movie we didn't even mention, just because it's just that kind of movie. Like, there's a lot of little details that you wouldn't even include in a summary, but it's like, those are all the things that make this movie so engaging. This world is very, just the way it's all connected.
It has many, many layers. Not necessarily thick layers, but like you were saying, like connective tissue. It's just a really beautiful piece of work. I'll just say that. Some of the technical aspects, we talked a little bit about, the way that where they filmed and everything. The sets that they built were incredible. They used a lot of like old churches and buildings and things for backdrops. And by churches, I mean like, Spanish missions and the like. Something you might see in California if you're familiar with the missions there, but just run down and just beautiful looking. And there's one little cool trick that they did, which I pointed out when we were watching the film, is during the night scenes. They're not filmed at night. They took their cue. The director, Mateo Gil, he took the cue from the old Westerns from like the 50s and 60s and so on, when they filmed during the daytime and then just tinted everything to make it look like it was nighttime. And that was a fantastic touch to really show the origins and the inspiration for this particular film. It really, it was like just a really well done modern version of like one of those old classic Westerns. And I think it honestly deserves a place among those.
And I think it's just kind of the kind of story it is. It's familiar because you kind of have like this old guy who is an unwilling mentor who's showing this young guy the ropes, and it just turns into a completely different kind of movie,
There were a couple of times when I wasn't sure what kind of movie we were going to actually have, without being like, ooh, twisty-turvy necessarily.
Right.
I mean, like, all of the twists are subtle, but important.
Like, the first 40 minutes of this movie was like, it could be its own movie, like just the way that whole act built up.
Oh, absolutely.
And, we even got like that. We got build up and like introduction to the point where they were in the mine. And that felt like its own little like peaks, we each act paid off really well at the end.
And it also didn't feel like just a typical 3-act film either. It felt more like a 5-act film or 6-act film.
Yeah.
Like there was just a lot going on in this film just all across the board, which I really, really loved. What would you say your best performance in the film was?
I think that's Sam Shepard.
Absolutely, Sam Shepard.
He looks amazing in this movie. Like, he's got the grizzled, old man look where it's like totally believable that he's still like just tough as nails.
Like he was a fairly, rugged and competent human being just in real life. And, he brought all of that and then some to this role for sure.
And then like that charisma too, like that kind of like a frontier wisdom, if you will, just that outlook of life. He lived that perfectly. You could see it very clearly.
Yeah, he really, he really did embody everything that this character needed to be. And Eduardo Noriega, as the other Eduardo, he did a really fantastic job too. I mean, his character went from, first off, it's like, by the time you're introduced to him, you already kind of like Blackthorn, and you want him to just kick this guy's ass or kill him or something after he, ruins his horse and, makes him lose all of his money, and then he's whining and sniveling, and then you just kind of hate him some more. And then you kind of start to understand him a little bit. And then you kind of start to sympathize, and then you really grow to like him. And then like in the end, you're just like the disappointed dad that Blackthorn is when he realizes that, he really stole from like the wrong people and really did the wrong thing for the wrong reason. And it was, cause like it was definitely Blackthorn at the end. It wasn't the, like pissed off. It was the, I'm not mad. I'm disappointed in you. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to shoot you in the leg and leave you to die instead of just killing you and taking the money.
Because to Blackthorn, he didn't want the money. That's the thing. He just wanted what was his from the beginning. So getting money from Eduardo wouldn't be getting what was his.
No, it would just be stealing from somebody else who had worked really hard and fought really hard to get it.
And when it was stealing from these rich bastards that he obviously hated.
Oh yeah, you had no problem with that. Thing. Oh, that was in his wheelhouse.
Exactly.
Stealing from like the railroads or the big banks in America. That was old hat to him. But then when also too we didn't quite cover is the way that the Indians took over the mines is they basically threw a little riot because they were getting crappy wages and mistreatment. So it was a very just thing for them to end up with the mines, and they earned it and fought for it, and it was just for them to have it. And this is and Blackthorn is a man, whatever else he may be, he has a very serious moral compass.
And I think it comes in there too at the end because he's also realized that the people he killed along the way, because he doesn't like killing people really anymore.
Yeah.
Unless he has to. So the people that they killed along the way were also, the just owners and stuff like that. So you feel that he feels the full weight of that too. All of his actions he unwittingly did.
Yeah. Yeah. He essentially ended up hurting people who really weren't much different from him.
Right.
Which is what he never wanted to do in the first place. So yeah, there's a lot of emotional levels there.
And back to the question is, they both of the leads, excellent performances.
Yeah.
The people in the flashbacks, great job.
Good supporting actors.
Our Pinkerton, great job in their scenes together.
Let's talk about him for just a moment. So McKinley, the Pinkerton guy, played by Stephen Ray. He was in V for Vendetta, a bunch of other stuff. He basically steals the show in the hospital, if you can call it a hospital, the doctor's office. He has such a great, scene where he talks about, basically just not wanting to pursue this criminal and not wanting to live that life and just wanting his well-deserved rest. that was just, I mean, there was so much great dialogue in this film. That scene in particular really stood out to me. And, Steven really just carried that whole, he carried that whole scene too. And, your eyes are glued to the screen that whole time.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really great point there.
There's a couple really good emotional gut punches in this movie. And that's kind of one of them. It's just, you think it's building towards one thing, and it's not even that it's a switch. It's just, it's a logical conclusion. He comes to the logical conclusion at the end, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from someone like that.
I didn't expect it at all, but I understood it when he was done talking about it.
Right.
And that's beautiful. It makes sense in the end. It's like, okay, I get you. All right. So how about worst performance in the film?
I don't know.
Just a typical typical little area we like to cover in every review. I can't really think of one. Everybody does a fantastic job. There's not any bad actors in this. There's no throwaway characters, really.
Yeah, I mean, the army general is the closest one to someone who has lines that really was just like, okay. I mean, they served a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, that could have been played by anybody.
Yeah.
But the nice thing, at least with that character, is we didn't have to see him more than necessary, and he didn't say more than necessary.
Yeah. He was there to basically show that they meant business, and,
And yeah, that's exactly what they got. So
yeah.
Another thing I like too is the sound editing. There were definitely some great times, like where you hear some gunshots and you think it's in that scene, and goes to the next scene. Just this editing and sound in general was really top notch in this.
The music as well. There was just a ton of kind of classic country songs and folk songs throughout the movie.
And not like in a soundtrack sense either. Like it was in the film, in the scenes. At one point in one of their stops, Blackthorn buys like a little travel guitar kind of thing. A really teeny tiny. It looked awesome, and he was all singing on his horse, strumming along. So you got a lot of that. You didn't get like that cinematic country music thing going.
No, it's all just like a guy singing and maybe playing a guitar, like all very kind of low key.
Yeah.
But a couple of the songs I recognized, and they were just either traditional folk songs or kind of classic country songs.
Yeah, just a great blending, and very relevant and topical.
And that kind of comes in with Eduardo at the end too, because he kind of picks that up from Blackthorn.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
So one other thing we've danced around, I guess, with everything, is that the script in this movie is great. The writing, as far as the dialogue, is top notch. It's all very believable and like perfectly in character and entertaining. And the pacing, and like we said, how there's kind of a lot of acts within it. It's just a really well written, and like everything is used well as well. I said well way too many times, but you get what I'm trying to say.
And this movie was written by Miguel Barros, who has only done a couple of other movies and a little bit of TV. And if the other stuff he's written is as good as this, he's definitely not getting enough work.
Yeah.
Like he really, and it's also funny too. So many of the movies we watch are written by like 4 people and they're still terrible. And you can tell that this guy really had a very clear story that he wanted to say.
And the director too, because their visions work together. You can see that what the writer was trying to do was executed on, as far as the look and the feel of this movie. It really, really connects really well. And I don't feel like there's anything wasted in this movie.
Oh, no. And it's funny because the film's only like an hour and 40 some odd minutes. And it feels so much longer because there's so much going on. And there's so much to like fill the eyes. There's so much to listen to. There's so much to follow, but in a good way that's not like tiring or like, oh God, is it over yet?
It reminds me of, there's like a famous saying. I don't know if it's kind of like a jazz or like something. I don't know who said it, but it's like, you're a really good player when you can play the rests. Yeah. When the rests are something that's actually engaging you And that is absolutely this movie. The
When-
times where they're traveling and the times where just little things are happening is like it's part of the song.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's just wonderfully paced, wonderfully edited, wonderfully told. So with all of that in mind, does this film meet our 3 primary criteria, Ken? Was it well written?
Yes.
Yes. Was it well acted?
Yes.
Holy shit, yes. Was it well produced?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, this has the look and feel of like a big, budget Hollywood movie, and it's not.
Yeah, and they didn't need all the effects.
They didn't need effects. They didn't need like fake CGI horses. There's no like high speed horse chase crap.
And like the simple, it's just simple stunts. The stuff, people falling off a horse.
Yeah.
Like,
Or getting smacked with a pistol.
exactly.
There's no big dumb explosions. There's no modern slang kind of worked in to appeal to the kids. The people who made this movie knew exactly what made all of the other great movies great in this genre.
And like they make really good use of things like dust on the horizon, like something that's really simple, but it's very effective in this movie.
Oh, that's a great example. They look over the ridge one time, they see that little dust. It's like, oh, those guys are coming.
Yeah.
It's like they could have been a guy out there with like a bucket just throwing it up in the air. But it works.
And like they don't show the people pursuing them too much, because you don't really you get a couple shots, tracking shots, long shots of them, but you don't they're not really characters. They're the force that's coming in, much like Blackthorn was feeling that encroaching on him when he was in America. It's kind of that pressure.
It's like death approaching.
Yeah.
And you're trying to outrun it, and it's still coming for you.
Yeah.
And it was coming for them till the very end.
Indeed.
That's a wrap for tonight's episode here at the O&M Stockroom. We're your hosts, Brian McGarry
and Ken O'Malley.
If you enjoyed this segment of Complimentary Cinema, more episodes can be found at omstockroom.com, along with links to our Patreon page and various streaming outlets. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next Wednesday with an all-new episode.